Welcome back to Eye on Foxborough. I'm Chris Mason here with Mark Daniels. The 2024 NFL Draft is in the books. The Patriots have also extended Christian Barmore. Starting to seem like Elliott Wolf, might have earned that GM tag. But Mark, first things first, man. What is your overall takeaway from this draft class for the Patriots?
It's truly a new era in Foxborough because what the Patriots are doing, Chris, they drafted a rookie quarterback and instantly they're trying to support him. Instantly they're trying to help him. They're saying, "Hey, you're our guy of the future, and we're going to do everything in our power to make life easier for you." And that started really on, I'd say, day 2, 3, when they drafted two wide receivers, two offensive linemen between rounds 2 and 4. I mean, for me, it's like wow, it's different here. Whereas like I felt like with Bill Belichick, he was defensive minded, genius, fine, defensive genius, but everything was so defensive heavy in New England over the last 4 years. I thought it did Mac Jones a disservice. So with Drake May, it's gone the polar opposite. 7 out of the 8 draft picks were on offense. I think it was the first time since the 60s they spent their first 5 picks on offensive players. And on top of this, on WEEI a day ago, Drake May said the Patriots looped him in before they made their draft picks. Think about that for a second, how different it is in Foxborough. The Patriots looped in a rookie player who hasn't played a game on their draft picks, Chris. My mind was blown by that comment that he had on the Jones and Mego show. And it just, for me, man, I think it's a sign of the changing tide, but it's the sign of them putting everything behind Drake May before he's even worn the uniform. I think it's great.
Yeah, I agree with that. And he was transparent too, where he wasn't saying they were asking for his input per se, but they were keeping him in the loop and letting him know, like, hey, you're our guy moving forward. This is who we're adding. This is who we're adding. And you know what? I'm sure May was stoked with some of these wide receiver picks. How could he not be if you look at some of the tape? So I think it's a really good thing all around. But my biggest takeaway was just how transparent this draft was. It was so weird where every round you're like, oh yeah, probably go for like before the draft. First of all, before the draft, they were really transparent about what their needs were. And then these picks come around and it's like, oh yeah, probably go with the wide receiver here, right? They take the wide receiver. Probably go with a tackle here, right? Take the tackle. It's so different than a Belichick draft where you had no idea what was coming at any point. It seemed like they did draft for need a lot of the time, and they were just totally transparent on it.
So 4 out of their first 5 picks, we kind of knew. Whereas number 3, I think Chris, we knew they were going to Drake May, but even like they're on the clock in round 2, and I tweet out, "Hey, here's a list of guys they could draft." Jalen Poke's in there. Round 3, I'm like, "Hey, here's a list of guys they can draft," and obviously it was going to be a tackle. So Caden Wallace was on my tweet, and then I didn't know Layden Robinson, the guard, so he wasn't in my tweet. But then their next fourth round pick, I'm like, "Hey, here's the best available," and Javon Baker was in there. So as you said, yeah, man, like we knew about Caden Wallace going in. I mean, even Jaheim Bell, their 7th round pick, dude. All of us was like, "Hey, here's one of the best guys available for their last pick, Jaheim Bell." And who is it? It's the tight end that we all knew about and mocked to the Patriots. It was interesting, refreshing, and even what Elliott Wolf said to us on Thursday night. I said, "Hey, what do you need to do to support Drake May?" He goes, "We need to add weapons and shore up the offensive line." And his next 4 picks are 2 receivers and 2 offensive linemen. I mean, when I say things are different in Foxborough, people, things are incredibly different in Foxborough. The GM told us what he was going to do and then did it. Like, that kind of says it all.
Yeah, it remains to be seen how it all works out, but it is a totally, totally different vibe there and totally different approach. We'll see if it works. But I mean, I think Elliott was right too, where they needed help on offense. Like the defense was good last year, and you take one 6 round corner, like that's all they get on that side of the ball. And it's like, okay, I mean, they're repeatedly bringing all of these defensive guys back, so they clearly like the defense kind of as currently constituted. Offense needs help, so offense got 7 of 8 picks. It's a crazy number, but they need those reinforcements.
And I thought about what Gerard said to us on Saturday when asked about that. He said, "Listen, we like our defense. We like our defensive players. We knew, as you all knew, we had to go on offense." And you think about it, Chris, like in terms of this Patriots rebuild, they're kind of set right now on defense. They have a good defense. We all saw it last year. They have a top 10 defense. They should have a top 10 defense again. Virtually everyone's back. There's a couple changes here and there. But what they had to do was revamp their offense. They have basically an entire new staff, a new system, new players. It'll be fascinating, as like Chris said, to see if this works out. There's no guarantee Drake May or Jalen Poke, Javon Baker, Caden Wallace work out. But what they did at the draft, I like it. I'd give their draft grade like an A minus. I don't think that even matters. It'll change in 3 years. But Chris, one thing I did want to do, we talked a lot about Drake May. We've talked a lot about Drake May. Going honestly past probably the last 6 months. He's been mentioned on this podcast probably since last October. But what we haven't done is talk about all the other draft picks they made. So, Chris, I think it'd be a good time for us to sort of go down the draft picks and talk about what their potential roles could be. And I want to start with a guy I really like, and it's because it's the next pick, 37th overall. Patriots traded down and they selected Washington receiver Jalen Polk. I love this pick, but Chris, I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I like it too. He seems really versatile. He seems like someone that'll fit in their system. A little Kendrick Bourne, honestly, in that like versatility where he can play outside, he can play in the slot. It's interesting that they didn't really draft a conventional like all he does is X receiver. And Elliot
Yeah.
Wolf later said like, well, that's not how I see receivers. That's not how I come from a Green Bay system where we were never tabbing specific guys like he's an X. They don't really do it that way. And so yeah, I think Polk just showed that he was a good football player at Washington. And some people are going to point to, well, he was a number two with Roma Dunze as the one. So what's he going to be like when he's getting more attention? Yada yada yada. I like this pick. And one thing that jumped out to me is Mayo gave his scouting report on him after the draft. First thing he said is like, we'll get to the receiver stuff. He is very good at getting his nose dirty. He likes getting his nose dirty. He's gonna get in the mix and block. And I think that you want like those types of dudes around. So yeah,
So,
I like this
yeah.
pick.
So a couple of the comps for him have been really fascinating, and I don't think people are thrilled with the comps, but I'm going to tell you why you should be. One would be Steve Smith gave his comp for Jalen Polk, TJ Husmanzada, and I think it was a scout gave Tyler Boyd a comp to Phil Perry. That's phenomenal. I'm going to tell you why. TJ Husmanzada had back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons. He was a Pro Bowler once. He was a very solid number two. And it was the same thing with Tyler Boyd, Chris. He had back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons in Cincinnati, and he's been really solid. He's been like 700 to 1,000 yards basically his entire career. If that's who Jalen Polk is, he's going to come out and catch between 700 and 1,100 yards. Dude, it's a phenomenal pick. Not everyone has to be Randy Moss. What the Patriots need to find is competent starting caliber receivers who can be productive. And honestly, in the entire, I'd say the last 24 years, the only guys who fit that mold that the Patriots have drafted are Deion Branch in the second round and Julian Edelman in the seventh. If you nail one of them, and at worst, Jalen Polk is 800-yard receiver. Awesome. I think that's phenomenal because what they need is they don't need to swing for the fences. They need just someone who's solid. And I think that's why I like Jalen Polk and why people should be excited about him as well. But I think the most controversial pick in the entire draft was in the third round. It was Caden Wallace, 68th overall, a tackle from Penn State, who Chris started for 4 years. However, it was at right tackle, and people seem to be concerned about that, but the Patriots don't.
They're not concerned, and he also isn't concerned at all. Where we talked to him after he got picked, and he said he was super confident that he can play on the left side despite not playing a single snap there at Penn State because Oli Fashanu was over there. So we'll see if he can make that switch. I think the Patriots are, there's a chance that he can do it. There definitely is. But I think the Patriots are kind of downplaying how difficult that can be. Where I remember talking to Isaiah Wynn about this a couple of years ago when the Patriots moved him from left tackle to right tackle. And he's like, yeah, the muscle memory is brutal. It's like going from being left-handed your whole life to trying to do everything with your right hand or vice versa. So I do think there are going to be growing pains there in addition to just a regular like third round offensive lineman growing pains. Like every single offensive lineman taken in the mid rounds is going to be a project to some degree.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think this is going to be a little more challenging than they're making out to be, but I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying it could be tough.
Yeah. So Caden Wallace, which is interesting to me about this, is he worked out at left tackle at his pro day, which Scott Peters, the Patriots O-line coach, was there. I think he was actually taking O-linemen through drills in that pro day, or maybe that was Notre Dame, but he was there. And then he also played some left tackle at the Shrine Bowl, and he practiced there. So Patriots do have some eyes on him at the left side. But what stuck out to me about this pick are two things. One, he's an outstanding athlete in terms of his combine testing numbers. He's great, and that's what the Patriots want. They want an athletic offensive lineman. But two, what Gerard Mayo said to us, he has confidence Caden Wallace can play left tackle because he heard it from Alex Van Pelt, Robert Kugler, and their other offensive line coach. The Patriots have two O-line coaches and their OC, and they all told Gerard Mayo, hey, we think Caden Wallace can play left tackle. And that's how the Patriots do business now, Chris. When there is a consensus among coaches who think, hey, we think they can do this, Gerard put everything behind it. I like it. It's different from how Bill Belichick did things, but with Gerard and Elliot Wolf, they're taking a lot of input and from their coaching staff on these picks and these prospects. And Caden Wallace is honestly probably the best example in the entire draft because Gerard had confidence from, the O-line coaches, from AVP, and he said, "All right, let's roll. Hey man, I'm good with that." So
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does put more pressure on the coaches though than they had in the past, where now this evaluation is brutally wrong. It's not just
yep,
falling on Bill like it would have before. Now it's like, okay, well, these guys kind of screwed it up too. And maybe blame should be spread out that way. That turns into a
yep.
philosophical thing, but it definitely puts more pressure on them to be right when they're like getting pointed to is like, oh yeah, these guys are the ones that are really on board with it. I don't know a ton about it because I'm a defensive coach and I'm a head coach for the first time. So I'm delegating. We'll see how it plays out, but it's absolutely different.
Chris, one of my favorite picks in this draft was also in the fourth round, 110th overall. UCF receiver, a Spitfire, a quote machine, Javon Baker. I'm excited about this pick. Let's just dive into it. Javon Baker is an absolute madman. People kept sending me photos saying this is Javon Baker's X-ray, and it had dogs inside a chest because he has the dog in him. Dude, just dive into it. Your thoughts on Javon Baker? He's a wild man. I kind of love it though.
Well, the first time that we ever talked to him, he was asked the first question of the whole thing was like, "What's your mentality?" And he said, "I want to kill defensive backs on the other side of the ball." And then it was, "Can you tell us a little bit about your game?" And he said, "I make people in wheelchairs stand up. Bring your popcorn." So yeah, this dude is definitely not lacking in confidence. He really isn't. Uh, a breath of fresh air, you would say, after like how tight-lipped some guys felt like they had to be in the previous regime. But, Mark, what do you make of him as a football player beyond just being a quote machine?
His hands are amazing. I've been watching his highlights. He makes these insane one-handed catches, really good, tightly contested catches. He's more of an X receiver, which is the Patriots need. One comp for him from the Athletic was Josh Palmer. I don't know people who know Josh Palmer is. He's essentially the third receiver out in the Chargers. He was injured last year, but the year before, his like second year in the league, Josh Palmer had 700 yards with the Chargers. I mean, he's a solid receiver. But I looked up because I like to do this. I like to look at combine times at this website, Mock Draftable, and it takes a player's combine times and compares them to everyone in his position who've done it. So at receiver, his athletic profile is number 1, Romeo Dobbs, number 2, Malik Neighbors, number 4, Reggie Wayne, and also on the list is Puka Nacua. So like his athletic profile has some very good receivers. That doesn't mean he's going to be Reggie Wayne or Puka Nacua, but I think Javon Baker has the bravado that you desire in an NFL receiver. He's incredibly confident. He was frankly pissed off that he fell to the fourth round, and I'm really excited about him. It is a new. I keep saying this. It's a new era in New England because I'm not entirely sure if Bill Belichick would have drafted Javon Baker. He is very mouthy, to say the least. But I kind of love it, and I really really like this pick. I think for a fourth round pick, I'd give this one an A+. Bring it on. I think he fits the mold of a more of a truer X receiver than
Yeah.
Jalen Pope, but I'm really excited about him, Chris. His hands, like some of these one-handed grabs he was catching, it's like the guy has glue in his hands. We'll
And
see if
he,
he can back it up. Can he back up his words and make, people in wheelchairs stand up and all that stuff? Maybe. But this training camp, OTA's rookie mini camp, it's going to be a lot of fun.
yeah, and he's really a home run hitter, which is something the Patriots have been lacking for a very long time, where he averaged, I believe it was 21.9 yards per catch this year at UCF, which was the second most in the nation. And there was something, it was close to 80% of his receptions went for a first down or a touchdown this year. So he was making big plays over and over and over again. The Patriots could use more of that. Their offense was so punchless last year that if you get like a legitimate big play threat like Baker here, I think he can really add a lot to the offense.
Yeah. And I actually skipped over one. It's my bad. My apologies to Layden Robinson, fourth round, 103 overall. Let me tell you my quick thoughts on this, Chris. I was told at the combine the Patriots had concerns about Cole Strange and his recovery from his knee injury a year ago. They weren't sure he was going to be much available at all this offseason. And what we saw them do was sign Nick Leverett, someone who started at left guard in the NFL, and they also signed Michael Jordan, which is a hilarious name. Michael Jordan also started at left guard in the NFL. And then in the fourth round, they draft someone who started at right guard in college at Texas A&M. I think Cole Strange, Antonio Mafi, Jake Andrews, these guys should all be unnoticed because when you draft a guard at 103 overall, Chris, it's because you view him as a starter. So like it'll be fascinating to me to see what happens this offseason at guard because I think some changes could be coming.
Yeah, and the scouting report on him is that he was the mauler in the college all-star game and looks like really good there. So I do think that guard is going to be one of the most competitive spots at training camp this summer. If you're, I don't know if that's like a get your popcorn type competition. For some of
Right.
us, it might be. I like the offensive line play, but I do think that, they're sending a message with this pick, and that's there's going to be competition. And I think both of those starting jobs are up for grabs to some degree, right? Especially if Strange isn't ready to go. But even if he is, I think there's going to be a ton of competition there, and they
And I
need it.
thought, yeah, and I thought City So played well enough, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's starting. But so drafting a guard that high after you drafted a center and a guard in the fourth round last year and a guard in the fifth, I think it's also speaks to the regime change and to the offensive scheme change. And like maybe some of the players who are here in the past will not be here in the future because there are new coaches and a new GM and a new head coach, and that could be another example. But
And
the
that's
only
one thing
defense,
that I
yeah,
think is that's one thing I think is really valuable about bringing like a new evaluator or a new set of eyes. I mean, these guys have been here, so it's not totally new, but like just getting a fresh person running the show is that there's not the nostalgia that like it's the sunken cost theory, right? Where sometimes coaches hold on to players for too long because they get attached to them and they think like, well, I invested, even if it's Cole Strange's case, like a first round pick in him, we're going to keep it going. Like you bring in a new set of eyes, you bring in a new like final say evaluator, that always changes because the nostalgia is kind of gone there, right? And you can just shape things the way you want to. I think it's a healthy thing for rosters a lot of the time.
absolutely. Their only defensive player, Chris. I like the pick. Sixth round, 180 overall. Cornerback Marcellus Dial of South Carolina. And I'm going to tell you why I like this, Chris. It's actually a need. The Patriots lost their starting slot cornerback, Miles Bryant, in free agency. He played the fourth most defensive snaps for the Patriots last year. The favorite to be in the slot is Marcus Jones, but he's coming off an injury. And then your other outside cornerback, Christian Gonzalez, is coming off an injury. Your other starting cornerback, Jonathan Jones, just had knee surgery because he was injured basically all last fall. So for me, it was like, hey, the Patriots need better, or I would say just more cornerback depth. Marcellus Dial, I think, is someone who could factor into the slot right away and maybe even play some outside cornerback. I like him. Seems like a really good kid. Cool story. And if you were going to take one defensive player in the entire draft, I would have guessed that it would have been a cornerback.
I agree with that. And I do think the lack of proven depth at cornerback right now for the Patriots is kind of crazy if you think about it, where like
Yeah.
Jonathan Jones is the only guy there that's been like a multi-year starter or multi-year contributor really in any way, where Gonzalez looked great last year, but he played 3 games and a quarter before he went down. Like was rookie of the month September, no doubt about that, but still hasn't put like a full season together. Marcus Jones played maybe 30% of the snaps on defense as a rookie, then missed almost all of last year. So, and then you have guys like Alex Austin, who, he looked good for a couple of games down the stretch. You have a couple other guys on the roster like that, but there's not a ton of proven commodities. So I think the more darts that you can throw at the board here, the better. And I do like the Isle story too. I think like going for a military college and then ultimately transferring to South Carolina, winning their like overcoming adversity award speaks a lot to the kind of like worker he is and the player that he can be. So in the sixth round, yeah, I like this pick too.
You said the key phrase there, man. Dart. Throwing darts at the board. You know why? Because their next pick was exactly that. It was quarterback Joe Milton III out of Tennessee. One of my favorite picks in this draft because I think the best thing any NFL franchise can do is throw darts at the quarterback position almost every year. It doesn't matter if you have Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, you need to load up. That's what the Patriots did. Joe Milton is a little older. He's like 24 years old, but he has honestly, he has the strongest arm out of any quarterback prospect I've ever seen. He can throw an orange over 100 yards. He could probably throw the football 80 plus yards. Joe Milton is the type of dart throw that I love. It's great that they drafted Drake May at number 3. That was the right pick. But Chris, I think this philosophy of taking dart throws at the quarterback position is extremely smart.
I agree. I thought it was a really good pick because I mocked the exact pick to them in one of my 2 mock drafts. It was like actually at number 193 too. So snipe that one. Yeah, very on board with it. One thing I would like to say about the orange throws is I have no context for how far like a normal person can throw an orange. So we might have to do that one day when we're at Gillette. Just
Let's
like
do it.
sneak out onto the field, grab a couple oranges and see how far we can throw them. Maybe do a little content for the pod. But yeah, I
Yeah.
like this pick a lot too, where like you have a guy that has all the natural ability in the world. See if you can put it together. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. If you can't, whatever. It was pick number 193 in the draft, 6th round. It's worth the risk. So why wouldn't
No.
you do it? Like I think the more competition you have in the better. And I do think he gives you an entirely different like look as a, I mean, presuming he'd be a third string quarterback here, you know, why not? Why not do it?
No, it's exactly why not? And now the Patriots have 5 quarterbacks on their roster, which are Jacoby Brissett, Bailey Zappi, Nathan Rourke, and the 2 rookies. And honestly, I mean, theoretically, Bailey Zappi could be in the outs, but I'll say this: I don't know who would trade for him. I mean, what are you getting for Bailey Zappi? Because the Jets couldn't get anything for Zach Wilson, and frankly, there's probably better Zach Wilson tape out there. He was the number 3 overall pick than there is Bailey Zappi. The Patriots could only get a 6th round pick for Mac Jones, and I can tell you all, Mac Jones was better than Bailey Zappi routinely in practice. You know what I mean? So, like, sure, theoretically, the Patriots could trade Bailey Zappi, but this might be something what they let play out in the preseason, let those guys play in the game, and if any of them flash, maybe you can get a 7th round pick for them.
Right. And maybe someone gets hurt. Maybe, I mean, there's no rush to trade him or cut him for nothing right now, right? Like the rosters are going up to 90 for a reason. Like you have plenty of time here. The one thing I will say about Bailey though is that it seems like his teammates in the locker room like really like him, and that's something you couldn't really say about Zach Wilson when you see like some of the reports that have come out of New York. So if you're trading for a backup third string type guy, I mean that's a box that you definitely want to check. So maybe you'll be able to get a little something for him, but yeah, I think there's no rush to do anything with him right now because I don't think the market's there, and honestly, I don't even know if the market will be there. So like what's it hurt to keep him on the roster for a couple more months, let him compete in camp this summer, and then go from there?
Yeah. So the Patriots' last pick, 7th round, 231 overall. I also mocked, but I mocked in the wrong round. I mocked him 193 and he went 231. It's tight end Jaheim Bell. I like this pick, not just because I mocked him, but he's actually also viewed as a potential fullback or an
Right.
H-back. He lined up in the slot for Florida State. He lined up out wide. He had a rushing touchdown last year. Hey, if they're going to bring the fullback or H-back back, I am all for it. I love that position, Chris. Jaheim Bell, I think for a 7th round pick, man, knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, and like I'm totally cool with this too, in the sense that they tried to do this, what, 4 years ago now with Dalton Keene, but used a
Yep.
third round pick on it, which is, I think,
Bad.
way too high. If you're going to get like experimental with like maybe this guy can play here and here. They actually traded up in the 3rd round for Dalton Keene too. So that was one of those ones in real time. It's like, all right, you must feel really good about that. Like, all right, if you want to like try it again with a 7th round pick here, totally on board. Like this is the dart you should be throwing there. Like that is the right spot. And yeah, maybe he turns into a really productive player. Maybe it doesn't work, but with the 7th round, that's where you roll the dice, not the 3rd round.
And actually, tight end is a position that Jaheim Bell, he could make the roster. So looking at
Yeah.
it, like the Austin Hooper, I think Austin Hooper, he'll be a lock along with Hunter Henry. But Mitchell Wilcox, so the veteran they signed, his guarantee is 20K. He's a
Right.
he's a roster bubble guy. They also have what's his Petway? Is that his name? I'm trying to remember the
Michael.
other tight end. LaMichael Petway is also on the roster. I mean, so at the end of the day, Jaheim Bell, if he works out this offseason, there could be a spot for him. He could make the roster behind Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. So yeah, I think it's a good pick. And overall, Chris, I was happy with this draft class. The biggest question mark I think was clearly Caden Wallace because they need a left tackle and he started at right tackle. But overall, really happy with the job that Ellie Wolf has done. He followed that up by extending Christian Barmore, and as Chris Mason tweeted yesterday, just give him the GM title, right? He's earned it, Chris. What else? What else does Ellie Wolf have to do? Just give him the GM title.
Right. And let's do a quick Barmore minute here too, where like I really like the deal for what it is too, where all the initial reports are immediately like up to 92 million because that stuff comes from agents and they want to make the deal look as inflated as it can be. So it's 4 years and it is up to 92 million. The guarantee is like 40, 41 million, 42 million there, which I think is totally reasonable for a player with Barmore's ability. Like I think this contract is so fair for both sides where like yes, he's earned at least this much. If he stays healthy, stays on the field, he could be worth up to 92 million. Like he really like could be a player like that. But if he's not, it's still not a deal that's going to absolutely kill you at the end of the day with the knee injuries and everything like that. So, man, I thought I looked at this deal and I was like, yeah, that's that's a really good signing. Why don't you give Elliott the GM title now? Like, what more does he have to show you?
Yeah, nothing. And add this too. Like, I know it. Robert Kraft has said they're going to interview people for the GM spot after the draft, but like, think about it. There are coaches hired because they have ties to Elliott Wolf. You know, a lot of them on the offensive staff, even on the defensive staff. The new defensive line coach was in Green Bay with Elliott.
Yep.
There are all these. Alonzo Highsmith is in the front office who worked with Elliott. Like there's zero chance Elliot Wolf is not here. You know what I mean? Like there's zero chance. And maybe Chris, this is all because to the NFL rules, you do have to follow a certain process when you elevate someone to that GM spot. Or maybe it's not a GM title. Maybe it's like president of football operations, something weird like baseball teams all of a sudden have done. It's like in baseball, it's not the GM
Chief
anymore. It's
football
like
officer.
yeah, you know what I mean? It's like it's going to be something like that. But from what I think will happen, my guess, Elliot Wolf will get a new title. I'm sure there'll be some new titles there in the front office. But yeah, Chris, he's absolutely done everything he needs to do to keep his job. This offseason has been solid. And Christian Barmore is just the latest example. The Patriots have said, hey, we're a draft and develop team. We want to keep our best players in New England. It's exactly what they've done, right? Hunter Henry, Josh Uche, Kyle Duggar, Mike Uwenu, Kendrick Bourne, now Christian Barmore, Anthony Jennings. They're keeping their better players in New England. They have the cap space. They're using it on their own. Hey, man, more power to them.
Yeah, I think the only knock to this point is still not getting like a true number one receiver when like you were very heavily in on Calvin Ridley in free agency and that didn't work out. But I mean, I think it also says something that number one receivers haven't moved on the trade market, you know? Like
Yeah,
Brandon Ayuk is still in San Francisco. T. Higgins is still in Cincinnati. So the asks are probably stupid right now. And at this point, it's probably wise not to pay them if nobody in the league is doing that.
fair point.
All right. That's our pod. Thanks for following along. We'll catch you guys further on down the trail.